afternoon, everyone. Borodar, Croeso. Welcome to the annual Exchange Adoption Lecture, which is beaming live from Cardiff University. I've put in the Q&A tab that we will have questions at the end. So if you've got questions you'd like to ask Sarah, please do put them in that Q&A and I'll collate them and act as a kind of raconteur for Sarah at the end. Sarah's very kindly said that she'll be making her slides available to everyone who's registered today. And just to just also then to mention that Sarah's included video content and the voices of people with lived experience of adoption. So just to keep that in mind as their presentation goes along. So let me start by introducing myself. So my name is Catherine Shelton. I'm an academic working here at Cardiff University in the School of Psychology, and Exchange asked me to introduce Sarah. I just want to begin by thanking Sarah for giving this presentation today. I'm absolutely delighted that you're joining us, Sarah. So thanks for agreeing to doing this on a Monday afternoon. So Sarah is the National Adoption Strategic Lead working with the regional adoption agencies in England. So prior to taking up this post in September 2021, Sarah was the head of One Adoption West Yorkshire, which was the first regional adoption agency, or RAA, in England. Sarah has over 30 years experience as a social worker and has worked for Leeds City Council developing fostering, adoption and kinship services. A bit of personal background. So Sarah is married with 2 children who are now adults, and she's a firm believer in restorative practice and developing services that are based on research and evidence of what works well. So key to her approach is hearing from those with lived experience so that they can influence decisions and services that affect their lives. So thank you all for being here this afternoon, for making time for Sarah Johal's talk. And Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you to get yourself set up. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Catherine. I'm delighted to be part of this. It's a shame I'm not in Wales. It would have been nice to have a trip down to Cardiff, but we're online most of the time these days, aren't we? So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next half, spending some time with you. So I'm just going to get my presentation up. This is when you think, does the technology work? So I'm hoping that you can see a picture of a girl on the beach. That's my first one.
Can.
Yay! Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so some of you might wonder who Adoption England is. Well, for those of you who don't know, Adoption England is a collaboration of regional adoption agencies working together and supported by a small central team. And I head up that small central team. And it's made up of a number of different strands of work. We have some project managers, we have some social workers, we have some commissioning staff, we have some very important business support who glue us all together, and we have some marketing and comms staff. So it is a small team. And our aim from developing our first Adoption England strategy in 2024 is to modernise adoption to better meet the needs of children and families today. We have around 34 regional adoption agencies, and I thought this map might be quite helpful just to give you a pictorial diagram. You can see that the size and shapes of different regional adoption agencies vary wildly. From the southwest, which is that big green area, you can see the geographical footprint of that. So they differ in terms of geographical size, they differ in terms of demographics, in terms of population sizes, and also in terms of how they're arranged, whether they're a hosted model, whether they're a partnership model, or whether they are a voluntary adoption agency. So lots of different ways that regional adoption agencies operate. So over the period of the 3 years from 2024 to 2027, these are the areas that we're kind of been working on. Firstly, the main thing is that we want to ensure that adopted children, young people, adopted adults, and everyone with lived experience of adoption play an important part in the development and delivery of services. We want to ensure that we recruit the right number of adopters from diverse communities who can meet the needs of those children whose plan is adoption. And one of the areas of work which I'll talk to you a lot more about today is around ensuring that adopted people maintain relationships with important people to them and that they have a good understanding of why they're adopted. We're also really ensuring that for those children who cannot live with their birth families, that they move in with their families, their new adoptive families, without unnecessary delay. And our focus is always on the needs of the children. And in terms of adoption support, we are working really hard with the regional adoption agencies and colleagues to improve the quality and consistency of adoption support. So those are our 5 areas. We work across all adoption agencies and local authorities and with other bodies involved in adoption. And we create forums for learning, collaboration. We work with CAFCAS, education and health partners and third sector organisations to help try to influence change nationally. And we work very closely with voluntary adoption agencies and the judiciary to address delay for children. Quite a lot of our work is done sort of pan-regionally, so that's across regional adoption agencies and nationally, to try and look at performance, data, how we deliver services, and we bring practitioners together to kind of look at building a framework for national practice standards, and you'll hear about some of that as we move forward today. We are trying to use research and evidence base to influence sector-wide development and evaluate the work that we do. So that gives you a little bit of a picture in terms of how we work. We undertake all of our work through these 5 work streams, and you'll see underneath the headings of these, which will be familiar to you from our goals, that there are different elements of focus, but the overall umbrella for the topic. So, for example, under national recruitment, we have a big piece of work that we undertake called the You Can Adopt campaign, which is a national recruitment focus. It's cross-sector, working with colleagues in the voluntary sector. We've got a piece of work focusing specifically on increasing diversity of people coming forward to adopt. And we've been doing a piece of work around the adopter journey and what it feels like for adoptive families who are going through the assessment process. That gives you a little bit of a picture. As part of our whole programme of work, we made a decision very early on that as part of our delivery of the Adoption England strategy, that we would have a research partner to help ensure that we worked to ensure that we focus on meeting the needs of children and their family, and that we learn as we progress about what works, what's helpful, and to ensure that any learning is fed back to working with those families. Therefore, we work with Oxford Brookes, the Institute of Public Care, and the University of East Anglia. They, between them, have evaluated a number of the practice areas that I'll be talking about today and other areas. And they've also undertaken specific research on elements of practice. For example, learning about disruptions prior to the adoption order and understanding a bit more about why plans of adoption for children have changed away from adoption. This slide essentially provides a framework for how we work with our research partners. First, identifying the need for research and the gaps in the evidence base, building the evidence base together with families, professionals and researchers, and then providing reports that can really help inform policy in the commissioning of services. And then we try to disseminate that back to professionals and practitioners and share the learning across the sector. So now I'd like to give you a little bit of a sense of the landscape around adoption in England and the planning for children and adopter sufficiency. So where are we? So you will see here that placement orders have gone down in terms of in England, and that's against a backdrop of a lot of government reform, quite rightly focusing on family support and also kinship, and so therefore probably more children are either returning home or going into kinship care, and that's got to be a positive thing. So it could be that actually more of the right children are having a plan for adoption. There are some children, unfortunately, who we know wait longer, and there are particular issues and topics of discussion around contact issues, but I'll talk about those in a little bit. So this gives you a picture of the number of placement orders granted, which has gradually gone down, and you can see the number of adopters not yet approved has also declined over the past 3 years. This does present great challenges because this slide shows that we now have more children with placement orders needing to be matched than the approved adopters that we have. And for those people who have worked in this field for many years, you'll know that this means that sibling groups, older children, or those with multiple needs, therefore take longer to find a family and can often have their care plans changed to long-term fostering. We've seen a drastic reduction in the number of adopters coming forward to adopt across England, and I understand this is also the case in Wales. The reasons for this seem to be multifaceted, but uncertainty and the cost of living crisis appears to be a major factor. I'll talk a little bit more later on about adoption support and the issues there around context and the landscape. However, at this stage, it's probably just fair to say that we are seeing the need for support from adoptive families rising, and this has really changed and accelerated since COVID, with complexity spanning multiple areas of need across health, education and social care. So for this talk today, I'm going to focus on some of the work we've been doing around amplifying the voices of experts by experience in adoption to ensure that their views and opinions help to shape the development and delivery of improvements in adoption practice and adoption support. Our main focus is to embed consistency across all adoption agencies in England, and this has been a challenge. And it's not because agencies don't want to do this work, but for a number of reasons over the last few years, they've been focused on structural reform, settling staff into new ways of working, and the size and makeup of the regional agencies that I discussed at the beginning is very varied. And I guess it's fair to say that practice in this area has also varied. Adoptive parents have historically in England had probably the strongest voice in helping to shape policy and practice, with Adoption UK and other parent networks helping to shape this. So one of the things we've been doing is trying to provide some leadership in amplifying the voices of birth relatives and adopted people, as these voices have historically not been listened to particularly that much in England. We've worked with our colleagues in PAC UK, part of Family Action Now, to ensure that birth parents and adopted people's views and experiences are listened to. And the Big Consult is an example of this, which can be found on our website. I'll talk more shortly in a short while about the work we've been doing with young people, and I'll share some of their views and key messages as we move through the presentation. But before I do this, I just want to give you a picture of some of the key messages in undertaking this voice and influence work. So since the start of our strategy in 2024, we have developed participation structures. So we've had reference groups for adopted people and birth relatives, and we have a developing youth forum who have all been involved in focus work, particularly regarding identity, belonging and lifelong relationships. These are key issues for adopted people, and lifelong relationships are important for all groups. Whilst we've been undertaking this work, we've been really keen to look at how we ensure that this has a strong and sustainable participation structure nationally. So if we set something up, it needs to be sustained, and trying to model that in terms of an approach as to how regional adoption agencies could do that within their own areas. Meaningful involvement. How do you meaningfully involve people with lived experience? Well, this is just an example, really, some of the work that we've been doing. So in October 2024, we held a youth event which brought together young people's and young people's groups that are in existence from across the country, and they shared their top 3 priorities, which I'll talk about in a minute. The Youth Forum co-delivered the Adoption England conference just this last year in London, and they also co-designed and commissioned and contributed to commissioning our Adoption England Youth Forum provider, and we've got a provider for that, which was Adoption UK, who are currently supporting us with the Youth Forum. Young people and adopted people were involved in senior national recruitment to my team, and adopted adults and birth relatives have shared their key priorities for improvement. So that's really important that we listen to exactly what they would like us to focus on, as well as them contributing to some of the work that we're trying to take forward with the agencies around policy, research and national practice standards. So we've shifted from consultation to co-production and shared decision making. Now, this is an example of the output from the youth event in 2024. An artist captured really helpfully different points shared by the groups of young people who came to take part and who gave examples of what they'd been doing in their areas. So, for example, we had the Adopteens, we had the Adoptables, and one of the groups from East Midlands, I'll never forget, they talked quite a lot about toast and sharing some time together and things which were really important, and they've all been working on different areas. And I'd now like to share with you a film that was produced by Adoptees Valley by their young people, and one of the important messages that came from their group on that day. So I'm going to move on to the presentation from there. This is when you hope it works.
I just found out. I was only in year 3, year 4, and my mum told me. And I sort of just announced it at school. I couldn't believe it, and I was like, let's just tell everybody. And then I couldn't take it back. And it spread. And now I'm the adopted girl.
Adoption comes with so many questions, and I don't know the answers. And I don't want to answer them. I want the questions to stop. You can look through a magnifying glass, see one of my most valued secrets, and then look through the magnifying glass again, and I'm still the same person.
My secret was out. I just wanted to be like everybody else again.
Nothing had changed.
But everybody else seemed to think that everything had changed. I went to my teacher, Miss Smith, for help, and she just had more questions. Questions that were my business. So I stormed out the room, and then Miss Smith thought I didn't want her help.
Can't adults just help without all the questions?
You don't need to know the details to be there for me. Everybody has a chapter they don't want to read out loud.
I joined my forever family when I was 4. There are lots of things I don't have the answers to before then.
They're my questions, not yours.
I only talk about my adoption if it comes up in school. Like when we were doing Blood Brothers, one of the brothers is kind of adopted, and one of the questions before we'd even read it was, is it right to give up a child? During the discussion, a lot of people said adoption was bad. I can't remember why, and I got sad.
So I talked to my friend. He's great. He doesn't really understand, but he listens. He's my best friend.
This is my life storybook. I keep it in a drawer in my bedroom.
A life story book is something you get when you're adopted. It includes some facts about your life before you're adopted.
So mine tells me where I was born, some facts about my family, some legal stuff.
There are some photos.
Baby photos, birthday photos.
One where I'm dressed up as a princess and standing beside Elsa.
One where I'm laying down on the floor with my special blanket, and some contact photos too.
Contact means the times I saw my birth parents after I stopped living with them.
And photos of me with my forever family after my adoption.
My book also says why I was adopted.
I don't really want to go into that if that's okay.
It's just for me to know.
Your story is yours and mine is mine. If you want to share yours with me, I'll listen. I only ask the same of you.
I sort of wish there was more in my life storybook. I look at it every now and again when I'm trying to fill in the gaps. It helps me make sense of my story, the bits that I don't really remember.
But I have my forever family, and I know all of that story.
I have parents and a sister, and they love me. They're not my birth family, they're just my family. My nana was my foster carer for a while, before I moved in with my forever family, so I've shown my book to her too. She's the only person I'd like to show it to for now.
I still have contact with my birth parents. I have brothers and a sister too.
They don't live with me, but I see them maybe 3-4 times a year. We do stuff like bowling and day trips. It's okay, but we don't have much in common. I have much more in common with my brother who lives with me. He's a pain sometimes, but I'm glad he's part of my forever family.
Everybody in my family has a different story.
Just like everyone in your family has a different story.
Things I'd like you to know.
If I'm fine about it, you should be too.
I am more than my adoption, so much more.
We don't all have the same starting point in life.
And sometimes I do need different things to you.
I am a person. That means my needs are different to yours.
My story keeps going. It's complicated and there are challenges.
But adoption for me meant finding a place to be safe and happy.
Having a new beginning with people who love and care for me.
My family.
And I'll share the bits of my story when I'm ready. For the rest of the time, I'd just like to be like you, please.
My adoption doesn't define me. Stop asking me about the stuff that doesn't matter. Get to know me, not my past.
It's much more interesting.
I know how to steal
I'm
half German inheritance.
I'm half Iranian. I love to sing and dance.
I really like to eat Ogbono. My smile is worth more than Buckingham Palace, and so is yours. Please don't tell my story. Let me tell it.
Let me tell it.
Let me tell it.
Let me tell it.
Such an amazing film, and a really important message there about let me tell my story. So I'd like just to return to the youth event that we had, because from that youth event there was 3 very, very clear key priorities that came from the young people during that day. And since that time we've been working in Adoption England through the delivery of some grant funding to regional adoption agencies, really to help kickstart or to continue to develop work that agencies have already done around increasing activities for children and young people to connect, and also looking at increasing voice and influence opportunities for young people. And nationally, we've been doing quite a lot of work to think about how we influence change in education. And I'd just like to share with you that the DFE has this year provided some funding to develop a new education transitions programme to support families with the move from primary to secondary school. And I think that shows the power of young people's voices and the influence that they've had. So moving on, one of the areas of focus around this work has been to help build practitioner capacity, but also to help increase knowledge and share practice to increase the confidence and capability of staff undertaking this work. The practice network that Adoption England organises and facilitates now has 91% of regional adoption agencies involved. We have some voluntary agencies and adoption support agencies that are part of that. And it's great that we've been able to have a dedicated knowledge hub site to share resources, some guidance, some examples of good practice where agencies have started to do something new. We've been really wanting to share that. And the Adopted Person and Birth Parents Reference Group helped develop a document to help guide practitioners about top tips when involving experts by experience and getting their meaningful involvement. So I guess one of the key messages around practitioner capacity is trying to improve consistency, confidence, and the quality of practice. The other area we've been looking at is trying to build sort of national understanding around some of the priorities. We undertook a survey across all the regional adoption agencies across England, and we got for the first time 100% response rate. And what we found was that there are some really good, strong activity going on with children, young people and adopters, but that there's lower provision around amplifying the voices of adopted adults and birth families. And so this insight is now helping us to think about how we target development and how we support. So we've been on quite a journey around this. We feel like we're starting to make a bit of impact. We've got greater visibility of people with lived experience in decision making, more opportunities for children and adopters to meet together in terms of peer support and participation. And there's a lot more stronger practitioner collaboration across the regions. So all in all, helping the fact that participation hopefully feels more meaningful, empowering and impactful. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour around voice and influence. I'd like now to talk a little bit about maintaining relationships. This topic is key in the modernisation of adoption, focusing on the importance of relationships for adopted children, helping them understand the reasons why they were adopted. The focus of this work, however, extends beyond supporting adopted children, young people and their families during childhood. And we all know about the lifelong impact of adoption for adopted people and both of their families, birth and adoptive families, and also the loss, the grief, the impact of trauma for many involved, whether an adopted person, birth relative. And it's important that we focus our attention on this. Over the last few years, we've made progress on a number of different areas of focus, which are outlined here on the slide. I'm just going to pick out two elements from this work. So the improving support for adopted adults and birth relatives has been important, and we've been working with the University of East Anglia to update a practice guide around access to records and intermediary service. And we've been providing training to all the regional agencies to implement this new guide. And the University of East Anglia and the working group put together some recommendations for government and for policy and legislative changes, which I know the Department for Education have been looking at. We also commissioned a pilot service to start working with PAC UK to provide the Family Connects website, and importantly to access free intermediary services for those who were adopted prior to 1976. It's great that we started that project. And given the apology 2 weeks ago by the Prime Minister in England around historical forced adoptions, I'm pleased to say that this service is going to be expanded, which is really good news. The second area just to pull out from this slide is the award-winning Culture Change Programme, which received the Chancellor of the University of East Anglia Award for a programme of work applying research into practice. This programme has focused on achieving cultural change by shifting standard practice around a contact, for example, twice-a-year letterbox, to a much more individualised approach to maintaining relationships with children, and also helping children with their developing understanding of their identity. Alongside the communities of practice and webinar groups and training, right across the sector with the judiciary and local authorities, the University of East Anglia has also undertaken survey work to help understand the progress of change across 8 key areas, which have all combined to help shift this culture of practice in this work. Unfortunately, I won't have time today to share the outcomes of this survey research, which is very interesting, but we can make sure we provide the links to that afterwards. However, I would like to share with you one piece of work that we did undertake to develop some resources for doctors, practitioners, in partnership with the National Family Justice Board, to get a range of views from young people around the importance of birth family connections. So I'm going to show this next film.
I was 6 when I got adopted and my sister was 2, I believe. I live with my sister, my mum, my dad and myself.
It was about midday, I think, when our social worker came, knocked on the door. My mum was asleep, so I opened it. She walked in, and then about 5 minutes later the police came in. And before we got into the car, the police lady said something that I'll never forget, which was, I'm really sorry this has happened to you.
When I was 2 years old, my mum and dad now found me on a foster, like an adoption website, and they said they'd like me. And then a little bit later, they came round to my house, and I immediately loved them. And basically, that was the start of me being adopted.
When I was a baby, my parents couldn't look after me, my birth parents couldn't look after me properly, so I got put in foster care. And then that's when my parents now was fostering me for a few weeks and stuff, and I started to trust them, and they didn't really want to let me go, so then I just, at the age of 4, got adopted by them.
Then they took us to a foster family. They were meant to be short term, but it ended up being, I think, about 1.5 years. And then a new social worker took me, so not my sisters, just me, to my current forever family. I think maybe half a year later, they left and got adopted by another family. But I still keep in touch with them, which is nice.
I absolutely love my family that I live with, and I'm so grateful. I feel loved and I feel safe with them. Like, I've never felt unsafe with them. They always look after me.
We all have the same name now, which I'm really happy about.
And to be honest, it felt really good, like, knowing that, like, I was going to be with them forever and, like, nothing was really going to change, because I didn't really want anything to change at that point. I was sick of moving, and I didn't feel loved. I didn't feel safe. I was constantly moving in with these strangers that I didn't know. I remember we were going through like a roller coaster of emotions. So
it definitely felt like a loss, and yeah, I hung on to those feelings, I would say, pretty much up until all the time. I hung on to those feelings most of my life, to be honest, because I obviously would miss them in my upbringing. It was very hard.
I had this like book when I moved in, and it was all about like my family life and who my birth mum was and who some of my siblings were. And I've always really wanted to find my brothers. I've always really been curious about my brothers. So when we found them, I was so happy. I was like, oh my God.
So my parents are actually, my mother's white and my dad's mixed race. So in primary school growing up, that was hard because everyone just saw my parents as different colours to me. So when I was in primary school, I often got called white myself. So they would call me white and I would just be like, but I'm not white. So when I could then grow up, see my birth parents, know my family, to know that culture, to know that I belonged.
I think we've got a date on the calendar to go see them. We try and see them at least once every year.
Oh yes, so the relationship was with my great nan and then her son Peter. I think I was like 5 or 6, and it was really fun since I hadn't seen her in like ages. Very new, because suddenly I was like, wait 1 second, who's this? And then I was like, oh, it's my nan. So basically I saw a bunch of pictures when I was like 1 year old. I was like, oh yeah, so it is my nan. I was like really happy. I was like, oh my gosh, look, it's my nan. I remember going to the park with her.
I actually did go see all of my family from my dad's side at once. After seeing my uncles and that, I did go see them all at once because I thought it would be easier than doing it separately. And it did actually go well. I was glad that my adopted parents were with me because my anxiety was so high, I don't think I would have been able to do it without them. So I was thinking like, Mom, Dad, you have to come. And they do also know my family, my birth family very well. So for them, that they can then like be there for me. They already are connected to my family.
I keep in touch with my sisters through messages, voice messages, photos, videos, video calls, and actually meeting up in person. But then I had to make the decision whether I wanted to carry on seeing my sisters or my birth mum. I chose my sisters, but I do keep in contact with my birth mum through letters. My birth dad's son and his sister, I recently got in touch with and met for the first time in person, and that was really nice.
I was really like curious if I was actually going to see her ever again after that, and I was very happy when I found out that I was, and that was going to be quite an often thing. When they saw us for the first time last night, they were so happy. Like I hugged my brothers, and I was like, oh my God, I've just hugged my brother. Like, oh my God. I felt like I was carrying all this weight on my shoulders for so long, because like when it's your family, you kind of want to know who your family is a bit, and you kind of want to know where they came from. You want to know everything about them. That was me. I literally wanted to know everything about them, and I'm so happy now because I know quite a lot about them now, and I know that we act in similar ways, and I know that I'm taller than one of my brothers, and I think it's quite funny.
I think my favourite thing of meeting my sisters was when they first see me and they run up to me and nearly knock me off my feet. because they just missed me so much, and they just knocked me off my feet when they hugged me. I always give them a big hug back.
Best things, definitely the discussions that we have, and we have loads of things in common, and you also got to hear about quite a lot of my other members of the birth family. It was really nice. I thought I was like, I'm gonna have like nothing in common with them, then it actually turns out that I actually have loads in common with them.
As soon as I spoke to my brother at college, I felt calmer, because I don't know, it was just like that conversation and the connection I had with him. But I was just able to go back to class with a huge smile on my face because I spoke to my brother on the phone, and it was good.
Finally got to see my culture, the people I'm with, the people who are my real family, get to know them, feel like I belong somewhere.
Before I saw my nan, I was pretty much clueless to what my birth family would be like, and I didn't really picture them the same. I just pictured them as like a random group of people who never really cared. And then when I saw her, I realised, well, actually they do care quite a lot about me, because they've like spent the time to come and see me and stuff like that, so they definitely did care. It felt really good, because like now I knew like it was definitely best that they adopted me, and that they didn't do it just because they didn't really want me anymore. Now I just knew that they just couldn't handle me. Like they were a bit too old to do that. So yeah.
Now that we've met in person, I think it's better than just constantly texting and video calling. I think now that we've met in person, they feel more comfortable, and I'm hoping that we can meet up more in the future and have days out and stuff.
We show pictures of us on holiday or voice messages. It's really nice because let's say they did something that I didn't know about, and we hadn't got a day on the calendar yet. It would just be easy to text them and say, what have you been doing? Have you been keeping busy and things like that. When I left them, it felt like they weren't part of my life. So I like it because it helps me feel like they're actually a part of my life.
All I've learned is that me and my mum have the exact same tastes. So we both like R&B, hip-hop, grime and stuff like that. And like my birth mum was the only one in her whole entire family who liked that, and I'm the only one in my whole entire family who likes that type of thing. So yeah, we're very similar. And also I have the same size feet as her, and they stopped growing at the exact same time as her, and they were both way too big for our age. I was like, actually that's quite cool.
If I wasn't able to carry on that relationship, I think I'd feel quite down. And I didn't want to leave the house last night, honestly. Like, I just wanted to keep talking to my brothers.
Most of the time we just have fun. We just forget that we don't live with each other. It is really nice.
Oh, it's my special snow globe. She gave this to me about a year ago, and since then it has been my prized possession. It's a picture of my dog inside a snow globe with a tree in the background.
Now that I know both of my families, it feels like I have like one big family now. So it's not like I have a separate family that I don't know about. It's now I see them as all of my family together.
I don't think about like my brothers or like my family as two separate families. I think about it as like one huge family and one loved family, and I feel so loved and safe with everyone. I think it's beneficial for the children to have their own voice. I think it is quite important for the adults to hear like the children's side of it and what they'd like, because I think it is important to have contact with like people, as long as it's like safe. I think it is quite important and beneficial because it's your family and it's like blood.
I think the adults should listen to us young people when it comes to this, because I feel like we don't get much of a say in it, and at the end of the day the decisions you make are based on our future, so we should have a say in it.
My parents were quite sceptical as well, I think, but yeah, I think they were quite happy when we found them. They
I tell my mum every time my brother texts me, I'm like, oh my god, mum, my brother's texted me. But yeah, I think they're quite happy for both me and my sister.
Listen to the child and think, do they want to keep in touch? Do they think it's important that they know what's happening with their birth parents? Because the child is the one who's had the most of the experience, and they're probably quite scared about moving on to a new family.
I would definitely listen to them because, like, as you know, if I didn't see them, then I would have just thought they were incredibly bad people, and it's really not very nice for them to think that their parents were really bad when they weren't. That would just be unfair. If I didn't see them, then I wouldn't really know anything about them, and it's really important that I knew like what my birth family were like. But since I couldn't see them, basically, I only just thought of the bad, because like they gave me up, like they gave me away, and I thought they were really bad people. But now I've seen them, it turns out they really weren't.
Now I'm older, I have more of an understanding of everything, I would say. It's like I missed out on the years of them getting to know me, so it took a lot longer, and it still is taking long to get to know them. Rather than when I was younger, I could have built up that connection, they could have known me, I could have felt like I haven't missed out on years of knowing them. So I do feel like I carry loss around. Every day I do wish I got to stay in touch with them, because I feel like that would have benefited me.
My mum basically does everything for me and my sister. So if we say like we'd love to see my other birth siblings maybe when they're a bit older, she'd be like, yeah, I'm on it, like I'd help you try and find them, which I think is absolutely incredible that she does that for us.
My adoptive family, they are happy to see that I'm happy. I think they're happy to see that I'm happy now, and they know I love them, so they have no worries.
It's really important that they do know what their birth family is like, and if they don't like them, then they don't have to meet up with them again, but if they do, then that could definitely change their lives.
Don't quite know how you follow that. So important to hear directly from young people, so I hope you found that useful. It is quite a long video, but I thought it was worth sharing. So the third area of focus for today's discussion is around early permanence and the role I feel it plays in modernising adoption for children. So what is early permanence? Early permanence, for those of you who don't know, is a foster care arrangement. The carers are approved adopters who've also been trained and approved as foster carers for the local authority, and the fostering arrangement is in place until the court determines the final care plan, whether the child is reunified to their birth family or goes to kinship arrangements, or a placement order is granted. Early permanence carers are well prepared. They can cope with the child returning home if that is the outcome of the court, and carers are carefully matched to the child. So why does early permanence matter for children? The University of East Anglia has been involved in evaluating around 11 projects across England who have sought to improve practice around early permanence, projects which have looked to improve the support to parents, to carers, and to train a range of staff around early permanence. And a theoretical framework kind of underpins some of this work. So why does it matter? We know that children under 12 months of age move on average of 3 times in care. I was quite shocked when I saw this statistic, because it's actually more than quite a lot of teenagers who move in care. And so it's really important that we try to reduce the risk factors associated with children moving home. We know that it promotes resilience of children and helps them to cope with stress and early adversity, and it also strengthens some of the protective factors by providing those earlier, secure and continuous attachment relationships with parental figures. And the difference with early permanence is that the adults accept the uncertainty, providing stability for the child. This is really, really important, because there has been some concerns, I think, around early permanence over the years, and about it preempting the court decision. And actually, this is not the case. It's actually adults within the environment are accepting the uncertainty that a decision is not going to be made until the final care proceedings, and that actually provides stability for the child. There are other important benefits around early permanence, particularly the benefits of the relationship development between the parents and carers during the fostering phase, you know, meeting them through family time, building opportunities for relationship building. Both are dealing with uncertainty, the birth relatives as well as the adopters, and the longer term benefits around children staying in touch where the plan goes on to be adoption. But there are some challenges. So sufficiency of adopters is a challenge, as we've talked about, and so there's less adopters willing to be considered as foster carers through early permanence route. And the system-wide change work that needs to continue to really embed practice and to address the reservations and sort of some myths that people have around early permanence. And crucially, we know that support is needed for all parties because both are dealing with uncertainty in the parenting role, and that support is really, really important. Just to give you a picture of some of the data around early permanence, since 2019, the number of early permanence placements have increased, and interestingly, the percentage of adoptions through early permanence have increased from 14% to 23%. So adoption support is the final area I want to focus on for the last sort of 7 minutes. I'll try to keep on time. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of the landscape around adoption support, that we're seeing the need for support for adoptive families rising and changing. As I said previously, that's definitely increasing post-COVID. And at the same time, both families and the systems are kind of less resilient. There are long waits for families. Adoptive parents are having to increasingly advocate on behalf of their children, and families feel pushed to gateways beyond children's services, for example, seeking EHCP plans in education to try and unlock support, to try and get diagnoses in health, to try and get additional support. And adoption support has evolved really in response to the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund and its structures and its limitations, and the experiences of adopters and the delivery of support and the perspectives around the support offered can vary significantly across the country. However, at the moment in England, we have various consultations out from government around reform around the SEND changes, around young people's mental health and mental health pilots in schools and local areas, which might well create an opportunity to have a bit of a strategic step back. These are the voices of some children, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to go through all of these, but you can see, and hopefully if you look at this recording coming back, you can hear some of the different examples of children's voices. I'm just going to pick out one for the purpose of this, and then I'm going to move on. I don't want to be a person with problems. I really, really don't want to be one. I just want to be the first to break it. Some really powerful examples from young peoples and their voices, collected by Joe Williams, who did a piece of work in the northwest of England. Those voices really are what give an example of the complexity of the feelings around adoption that young people are dealing with, the impact of early trauma, early adversity on many of the young people, and why it's really important that we have a good adoption support system to support them. So we've been focusing on 4 main areas of work. The practice improvement work here has focused on early support when children move in with their family, called the Becoming a Family framework, which is currently being piloted in about seven or 8 voluntary agencies and regional adoption agencies. There's been also quite a lot of work going on around the interface between regional agencies and front door safeguarding teams and the experience of adoptive parents. You probably know the research by the Potato Group and the Patch Group have really shined in the light on issues for families when needs escalate, and these experiences have been supported now by quite a body of research from the Family Roots study and the Safeguarding in Adoption and Special Guardianship, that when there's a crisis, there's very much a feeling from adoptive parents that they're feeling blamed when asking for support. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about this today, but there's quite a lot of work going on around this. The ASGSF pilots, Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund pilots, are a new a new thing from last year, with a few RAAs involved in trying different approaches to the standard approach to the ASGSF, with group approaches, working with teenagers, commissioning block therapeutic parenting programs, as well as a real big development around multidisciplinary approaches to adoption, and undertaking specialist assessments of children's needs. We can see here that these are some of the multidisciplinary models we've been supporting across the country, and Oxford Brookes Institute of Public Care have been evaluating these approaches for the last 3 years and are just about to publish the report. And these teams vary, but most of them have a clinical psychologist. Some have education workers, some have speech and language or OTs. And although the teams vary, they're very helpful in assisting with formulation of understanding need of families, providing consultation for social workers and parents, providing training and providing direct work as well. In addition to the multidisciplinary teamwork, we've been focusing quite a lot on national commissioning programme of work. It's very important in adoption support to really understand the needs of families across the piece, and all of the regions have undertaken a strategic needs assessment, which has been important to improve our collective understanding of need. We've increased the commissioning capacity in the PAN regions, facilitated communities of practice, and importantly, the funding allocated has allowed the PAN regions to pilot a diverse range of support from different organisations, either internally or externally, and many of those have been co-produced with adopters and young people. Evaluation frameworks have been used to assess the impact of these projects and to inform sustainability planning with the help of our research partners. And this just gives you an example of some of the practice that's been going on across the country. Quite a lot of focus on peer support, particularly around adopter peer support or young people's peer support. And a very interesting work going on in the Midlands around co-designing short breaks and peer support models for children and young people. So keep a watching brief on the progress of those. Looking forward then, over the last 6 months, we have been increasingly discussing with families and practitioners and leaders the need for a national model of adoption support to address the challenges in the system and move to a coherent model of adoption support. This work is iterative, and we've consulted over 200 people to develop this to date. The work is evolving and being shaped by experts by experience as well as experts by profession. The developing model is designed around changing the rhythm. It's designed around the rhythm of need and risk, recognizing that families require different types and levels of support at different points in their journey. Families need to be able to move fluidly in and out of support depending on need, and not through rigid tiers of access. This model is one that seeks to normalise support as part of adoption, rather than seeing support need as a response to failure. The model also explicitly recognises that escalation is often predictable. It's often shaped by the interaction between needs, development, the environment, and system response. For example, the transitions from primary to secondary school is a good example of this, which can be a big risk factor. The main element of the model is preventative wherever possible, but it is designed for escalation when needs increase. It's important that any national model provides coherence but has ability to be flexible locally, and that it's responsive either at a regional or a local level. But importantly, it's about a life course model, thinking about the whole life of a child, not just the way that they present when they move in with their new family. So it's bringing together what we know about the child's early life, our understanding of patterns of need, our collective knowledge about what works and what factors support resilience, and our understanding that combinations of needs that carry higher risk for families, for example, sibling groups, FASD, child-to-parent violence, we know carries higher risks to families, and we need to be aware of that. Multidisciplinary approaches, working collaboratively across social services, health and education, thinking about all of the domains of a child's life and their wider family's life. We need to be anticipatory and have responsive support. And moving much more from a reactive approach to a proactive one, respond to the changing needs of children. So whatever happens next with the Adoption Special Guardianship Support Fund, we need to have a more of a strategic approach to commissioning. The market has not developed by chance. It's evolved in direct response to the way that the fund is currently structured and allocated. It has had unintended consequences with its emphasis on individual applications and therapeutic episodes rather than support to match the rhythm and interplay of needs and risks over time. So, but whilst this has enabled access to important support, it's also driven a reliance on spot purchasing, short-term commissioning arrangements, which unfortunately has created fragility and unpredictability for both funders and providers. So hopefully we will look to develop an evaluation framework with an agreed set of outcome measures, and that can inform commissioning decisions over time, but importantly keeping a mixed economy of provision and embracing a variety of providers within that overarching model. So last but not least, what makes this model different to what we currently have? The model is not trying to describe every service or every intervention that might exist locally. It's trying to describe system logic for adoption support, how support is timed, how need is understood, how complexity becomes visible, how families can move in and out of help, and how escalation happens by design rather than crisis. We know the factors that kind of are involved in escalation. So this is the key difference in terms of moving away from episodic service-led support towards more of a coherent system that connects adoption support more deliberately with health and education and social care, and really defining the specific adoption support contribution as well as the wider system responsibility. So this concludes my talk for today. I'm delighted to have been with you, and I think we're going to have an opportunity for some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Sarah. That was an excellent presentation. Yeah. I think you balanced the content with the videos really, really well, and the video testimony is profoundly moving. I think it's some of the most compelling testimony I've ever seen. So excellent. I'll let people start to put their questions in the Q&A rather than the hands up system. I wonder if you could reflect for a moment on where you think we've come in the last 5 years. I mean, some of that's in your talk, but what really stands out for you in terms of how the sector is moving forward at pace?
Yeah, I think the biggest change for me, I think, is the visibility of people with lived experience in trying to shape the policy, trying to shape practice and really amplifying their voices. I think when I first started in this role, you very, very rarely see a birth parent, you very rarely see an adopted person, less even so a child, particularly in the, apart from the kind of individual case examples or within your individual scenario, you didn't see it at scale. And I think that's been a significant step forward for the sector, because I think corporate parenting in children in care councils, for example, have been in place for quite a while, but very little really around adopted people talking. So that for me is probably the biggest. And the appetite, I think, key motivation, people are really, people who work in this sector are really passionate, committed, and in a way bringing those communities of practice together really allows people to have some really good, robust discussions and sharing practice, because practice is so varied across the country. Everybody thinks their practice is the best, don't they? I remember this from doing regionalisation. The prep training of adopters was, no, ours is definitely the best. So just trying to get that kind of within a local area, some agreement around the shared understanding of practice, and then you're magnifying it up in terms of looking at the whole country, it can be quite challenging, but just opportunities to share. There's not always one right way to do things, is there? There's lots of different ways.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Andrew Brown from the Rees Centre. Hi, Andrew. Welcome back from ICAR. So Andrew's from the Rees Centre, and he asks, how can the research community work better with families and organisations to improve the inclusion of adoptee voice in research?
Oh, well, often we do have researchers do contact us from academic institutions to talk to us. And we've had quite bit of a debate around this, because there is also some fatigue, I think, amongst the adopter community in particular about having to constantly answer surveys or be available.
Yeah.
So it is a balance, and just trying to think about how we ensure that their views and opinions are meaningfully involved, but also what does it change afterwards? How do we feed back to them the change that has come from their views? So we're really keen to hear from researchers about any work that they're looking at, but we also have to balance that with overload. So I think trying to get that balance right and trying to think about which are the right questions we need to be asking at the moment. Where's the gap in the evidence? Yeah. What might our priorities be? Tricky question, but a good one, Andrew.
Yeah. Leanne Cook is asking, how do you encourage young people to take part and share their life story with you? Do you offer any incentives or?
Well, when we work with young people with lived experience, then yes, we do usually provide some vouchers for people to share some of their experience, make sure that they've got a supportive environment, a trusted person. So it's scaffolding support around those young people, and importantly, always feeding back to them what difference it's made in terms of their involvement. So they need to be a key part of the team. And this work, it's very sensitive. You've got to make sure that you've got the support in place. But the Family Justice Board, particularly the young people in that longer video, are talking about contact, very personal information they were sharing. But their parents were involved in the support around them. The young people had youth workers who were involved in supporting around them. And obviously they've given their permission at the moment, but if they change their minds, they're quite within their rights to say, actually, I'm now 7 years older, I don't want you showing that anymore. Then we would respect that and take that down. And that has happened.
Yeah. Okay. Right, this question is long, and if I need to say it again, Sarah, just let me know. So Joanna Alper asked, do you think it's realistic that we can have more partnership working between social care, health and education when it comes to support? We know it's important, we know it would be helpful, but we also know there are lots of barriers. So do you think there's a political interest to move into this direction?
That's a great question from Joanne. If you'd have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would probably have said no, that would be really difficult. However, I do feel that we are beginning to see the join up, particularly with health and education, at a more senior level within government than I've ever seen. And what I would say is there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I feel, at the moment with this current administration, and there's a lot more talk about join up. So, for example, some of the transitions work that we've been talking about and the work around SEND, the SEND consultation, there's more join up from government than I've ever seen around the involvement of education and health and those kind of pathways together, thinking about how they can move forward with pilot work, for example, the mental health in schools, these mental health pilots around multidisciplinary approaches within local areas and how this can support some of the multidisciplinary work we're doing in adoption. So I think the appetite is there and the political interest. I just think there's just so much change that's been going on in ICBs, the National Health Service, and in the education space that it's almost like you bit of paralysis, can't you, because there's so much going on. But I definitely think there's a will, but I do think it will take a little bit of a while for it to move through, but the wheels are moving slowly, Joanne.
Okay, thank you. Victoria Craig says, not really a question. She's an adoptive mum to 2 boys, and she says the importance of maintaining relationships is acknowledged and practiced in our family. I feel that there is a need to be open to birth family connections, and this presentation underscores that. I think that birth families need as much support to be confident and comfortable in having a connection with adoptive parents. So, yes, we could all agree with that. Thank you. And then Karen Davies is a counsellor in Wales in secondary schools, and obviously without Ofsted registration, adoption as a theme is not ethical to address. But increasingly experiencing high ratio of young people not being able to get therapeutic support from her region. within SUAS. So where else in South Wales can children and young people get therapeutic support? That
might be a bit challenging for me because I'm not based in South Wales.
I think if other people feel they can help, Karen, do feel free to put things in the chat with some signposting. That would probably be really helpful for Karen to see and take away.
I mean, the other thing that's really interesting around some of the adoption and special guardianship support from pilots, particularly in the east of the country, is the work that they've been doing with young people. So they've been moving away from individual therapeutic work and moving towards more group-based, sort of creative therapeutic work, because actually the power of coming together as a group of young people talking about adoption and addressing it in a different way has been felt to meet the need actually of those young people, and that actually they have preferred that to undertaking in terms of individual therapy. So it might be worth looking with your regional agency about whether there are maybe different ways of approaching some of the issues to scaffold some of these young people in terms of sharing their story and building connection for them, because it might address other needs and be more sort of strengths-based approach rather than looking at kind of therapeutic approach, which addresses some, it's more of a deficit model, isn't it? There's something wrong, so we need to fix it, rather than trying to build protective factors. That might be a thought.
It's a thought, eBritain says, thank you for sharing such powerful videos, and thank you to those who shared their experience. Good point. I've worked in permanence since 2014, but I'm also a music therapist who is doing a PhD on the efficacy of creative therapies and adoption support. My research has shown that adoptees and adopters value these types of interventions, but evidence hierarchies can make this type of commissioning difficult. So how can we make commissioning teams in social work adoption overall feel more confident in using such therapies when the evidence base is smaller?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question around the evidence base, because people might have seen the DFE consultation question around the NICE clinical evidence base and what sort of standards of evidence you need to say that it's evidence. And sometimes it's practice-based evidence as researchers, you know far more about this than me, Catherine. But I think on the ASGSF, we had a talk by Matt Woolgar last week, who talked about something around 20 different types of interventions that are used, and actually not many of them have got a very high standard of evidence base. And I'm not sure social workers and local authority commissioners necessarily understand the whole landscape around what's evidence-based and what's practice evidence, and the different standards of education. Does it fit what foundations say is a gold standard around evidence? So there's a whole big question around evidence and the evidence base, and I don't feel equipped at the moment to be able to answer your question around the music therapy and the kind of evidence base around that. But I know it's definitely a topic of huge debate at the moment around this, and I'm interested to see where the English government go in response to this, because my sense is that psychologists working with children should know the variety of different interventions that are kind of beneficial for the needs that child has, rather than necessarily a whole prescriptive list that the government says yes, it's in or it's out. It's a bit more nuanced than that.
We have an international question, Sarah, from Alka. I'm probably mispronouncing this. Alka Menz, who's a Dutch Expertise Centre for Intercountry Adoption, the INEA. She said, thank you for a really interesting presentation. What about legal support? Is there any need for this kind of support for adult adoptees in England? They say that they receive many questions on things like name change or revocation of adoption. In terms of legal support, what would you suggest is happening in England?
Generally speaking, there's not lots of need for legal support for adult adoptees. I think Coram Bath, who most local authorities fund for membership, they have access to a legal advisor. And I know that if Jane Paul was here, she might talk about some of the issues that might come up on the advice line, which might be around technical issues or legal issues, and Alexandra from Quorum and other colleagues might be able to answer that. Certainly when I was an RIA leader in West Yorkshire, we didn't specifically have the need for legal advice around adults, but we don't do many intercountry adoptions in England. So I don't know whether that's different. So yeah, it doesn't come up as a big issue around adult adoptees that I'm aware of. Other people might have different experience.
Right. Well, I think that's all of the questions, Sarah. So thank you very much for being willing to speak to us today. And I want to thank everyone who's joined. It's been international as well as cross the devolved nations. So thanks to everyone for being part of the discussion and for your thoughtful questions. And Sarah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I hope you have a good week ahead, and we can stay in touch about best practice across the border.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Sarah.